Hello, my name is Clint Zeagler, and I am a senior research scientist at Georgia Tech. And I'm here to present a paper entitled BETTA WERK, Using Wearable Technology Performance-Driven Inclusive Transdisciplinary Collaboration to Facilitate Authentic Learning. So these are the authors on the paper. In the sense of participatory design and inclusion, we all work together. These are the students who worked on the projects in the class and the external. So this paper describes a set of class projects where groups worked with performers as collaborators. The performers were external to Georgia Tech and came in and worked with the student groups. We discussed the advantages of working with collaborators on wearable tech human-computer interaction projects and the benefits of project-based learning, specifically performance-driven projects, especially when working with performers or others from disciplines that are far removed from HCI. Just a quick note on gender pronouns. Because the groups in the class worked with drag queens, sometimes the drag queens, especially when they were out of drag, used he, him, and when they were in drag, they used she, hers. We might use those pronouns interchangeably, and we talked to the drag queens and they said that was okay. When I talk about authentic learning and project-based learning, that basically focuses on working on real-world projects with the student groups. When I say transdisciplinary collaboration, I mean collaboration that's really more than interdisciplinary. So interdisciplinary would be perhaps two different disciplines working together, but those disciplines are close to each other. Here we're talking about computer scientists or computing students working with performers or drag queens, so very far removed. Boundary objects. So what I mean by boundary objects are those things or methods that help groups work together. And usually that's descriptive. So we would look back at a project and say, oh, that was a boundary object. So about the course, here's some of the goals of the course. But basically, this was a wearable technology course that focused on how wearable technology affects society and society affects wearable technology design. And it does not focus on building skills. So the group projects, we had 3 different projects. 2 groups worked with local drag queens from a drag act called The Other Show here in Atlanta. And the other group worked with a hip hop style dancer on performance costuming. All 3 groups worked on that. We're going to focus just on the 2 drag queen groups today. For the class, obviously lectures, we had readings in the course, and then we did a lot of in-class discussion. There were also some skill demonstrations. So as students needed, as the instructor, I would help with certain tech skills or fabrication skills, sewing, things like that. For the methods of research, we used experience reporting and feedback, so questionnaires at the end of the course, along with observations from me. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the specific projects and their outcomes. One student group worked on a project that they named Drag Duality. Essentially, it was a way for the audience to have input into the drag performance. So as the drag queen came out on stage, her costume that they fabricated would light up in one of 2 ways with different patterns. And those would correlate to separate songs. And the audience could vote on their phones which performance they wanted to see. And then the dress would light up in that way. One of the ways that the students were able to work with their drag queen in this project were through drawing. So you see the student sketch on the left and the drag queen sketch or the collaborator's sketch on the right. And this is an example of how the groups were able to talk to each other about concepts when maybe they didn't have the same terminology. So the drag queen performer that they were working with did not have a high level of technical expertise. So a lot of what she was doing is writing call outs to say, this is what I think this should do. Whereas you can see on the left, the students in the group didn't have a high level of being able to sketch and draw it out, but they were able to show what portions of the garment would be able to change color and how that might happen. So students reported learning a lot about hardware skills and fabrication garment construction, fabric choices, and that's to be expected because they were learning those things on their own. In the course, we talked about methods of communication and also how to trend forecast for different types of interactions that might be interesting for the performance. The other project was called La Mandragora. It changed with reaction to light from the audience or from the spotlight. So when the spotlight hit it, the flowers would open up, and when it was in the dark, tendrils would fall down. Again, students reported learning about electronics and mechanisms here mostly, and also sensors. So one thing the students really had to work through was sensor thresholds, how to get those working correctly. The students also had to communicate with their drag queen collaborator to figure out performance style, because this wouldn't work on what they call a dancing queen, right? Because of the way it had to be situated on the head and how heavy it was, you couldn't move around a lot in it. But luckily, the performer that they were working with was more of a host. Okay, so some observations and discussion. First of all, I propose that wearable technology is a great platform for HCI education, mainly because so many different types of disciplines have to work together or have an understanding of each other to work on a wearable technology project. And the more diverse team you have, the better projects you tend to end up with. Within the class project, some students had to step outside of their comfort zone in many ways in regards to learning new skills, working with performers, and perhaps even learning new cultural references. And you'll see this in some of the quotes in the paper. Working with people outside of their comfort zone, especially in a discipline far away from theirs, it enriches their learning experience, and it enables them to work better in groups when they leave education or when they leave school. Working with students and collaborators in different disciplines helps students get ready for real world careers. When you leave college, you don't tend to work in a group that's fully computer scientists, in this case at Georgia Tech. So working with people and understanding how to work with people that aren't from your discipline can be a really enriching learning experience. Again, we talked about boundary objects. Within education, I think I have found great success in teaching about boundary objects and having them do readings about boundary objects before they get into real group work. This does a couple of things, but by describing and understanding a boundary object and saying, we're going to use a boundary object, instead of looking back and saying that was a boundary object, it allows the group to upfront understand that there are boundaries and that you're going to have to create some kind of shared meaning to be able to collaborate together well. In this case, as in many cases, drawing was a major boundary object. Not just the descriptiveness of the drawings, as we saw before in the group that was using drawing to explain things to each other, but if you drawing together, you start to understand the importance of which parts mean more to the person that's drawing by understanding which parts they drew first. And also you can see how hard they're thinking about the drawing, which imparts weight and importance to the drawing. So drawing is a great example of a boundary object that these groups used to be able to collaborate. A note about performance-driven collaborative work. So when there's a performance that's going to happen, it becomes very important that the device works well and is ready on time. For instance, the drag queens were very concerned about the parts of the garment that they would not be able to fix. So they needed to know that the technology was going to work correctly before they walked out on stage and have trust in that. So being able to practice with that. I'll say also that working with performers and especially drag queens have this make it work attitude. When I saw the groups working together with the drag queens, many times drag queens would be like, okay, we've been talking about this for 15 minutes. Let's just start making, let's put the things together and make it happen, which students, especially in academia, can fall behind on. Many papers before have talked about skills as a barrier. The way we overcame that is, even though this wasn't a skill building class, I held skill demos, and then I also pointed student groups towards online resources and local resources for help in being able to build and code the things that they needed to. And you'll see that many of the students noted that they had difficulty with learning the tech, but that they quickly overcame those. And in the end of the class, it's one of the things that they said was most valuable in their learning. So things to think about when creating groups: try to use terms like experts and collaborators instead of mentor and client, because that the mentor and client tend to denote levels of authority. If you use collaborators, people work together, and then everyone feels like an expert on the things that they know about. Try to find outside collaborators from a different discipline with very different skills and expertise from the students. Exploit the differences and use methods such as boundary objects to allow for collaboration, remembering that if you teach that up front and explain what it is, the students will remember that, and hopefully remind students while they're working they are using the processes and methods that you've taught them, and make sure that they're recognizing that. Try to work on projects that have real world consequences, especially performance driven work. If you have to get out on stage and something has to work on stage, it means that it really has to work because you're in front of people. And then finally, working with collaborators from different cultural persuasions can help in calling out and illuminating differences in disciplines, and can aid in creating a shared cultural understanding that can impact students' future work. So that's the case study on these projects. I hope that you take a chance to read the paper. And again, the paper is You Betta Work, using wearable technology, performance-driven, inclusive, transdisciplinary collaboration to facilitate authentic learning. And I'm Clint Zeagler, and my contact information is there on the side. Thanks.